The purpose of a titration is to quantitatively determine the concentration of an unknown solution, commonly called the titrand or analyte, by adding a volume of a chemical with a known concentration called the titrant. Carolina's complete burette assembly contains the basic equipment to get you started, including a burette, ring stand, and a burette clamp. A burette is a long, narrow, graduated tube used to add titrant. It has a stopcock to regulate the flow of liquid. Notice that the markings on the burette go from lowest at the top to highest at the bottom. The ring stand and burette clamp are used to mount and secure your burette. Other materials you will also need include a small funnel to help you fill the burette, a 125 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask, which works best for titrations. The shape of the flask allows for more vigorous swirling than a beaker or other glassware and minimizes spill hazards. A volumetric pipette and pipette bulb to transfer a known volume of analyte to the flask. A wash bottle filled with deionized water, a beaker or flask of titrant and of analyte, indicator selected for your reaction point. To prepare your burette for the titration, it is good laboratory practice to rinse your burette thoroughly with deionized water, then with a small amount of titrant. After each rinse, open the stopcock to allow the liquid to drain out the bottom. If there is a lot of liquid clinging to the walls of the burette, then thoroughly clean your burette and repeat the rinse process. The accuracy of this technique is dependent on the titrant flowing into the flask and not sticking to the walls of the burette. Mount the burette in the clamp, making sure it is positioned vertically and there is enough room to position your flask underneath the tip. Check to see that the stopcock is in the closed position. Insert the funnel into the top of the burette and fill with titrant almost to the top. Filling exactly to the zero mark is not necessary, but you do need sufficient titrant to complete the reaction. Check the column for air bubbles and gently tap to free them from the side walls. Later, estimating the final place. Use the volumetric pipette to transfer the analyte to the flask. Add a few drops of indicator to the flask and swirl. Place the flask under the tip of the burette. Record this volume. Placing a piece of white paper under the Erlenmeyer flask may make it easier to detect the color change. Operating the burette requires two hands. One hand turns the stopcock, while the other hand swirls the flask. Practice turning the stopcock a few times to familiarize yourself with how quickly the flow starts and stops. It is common laboratory practice that the first titration is an estimate. Open up the stopcock and allow the titrant to enter the flask quickly. Continuously swirl the flask. As the volume of titrant in the flask increases, the color of the indicator appears, then disappears as you swirl. When the analyte becomes a colored solution, close the stopcock.